Who's the worst person you've ever worked with? A schmuck named Brandon. We were lifeguards and we have a local swim team use our outdoor pool for practice every night. 12 is masters, and by 8 p.m., you have the fifth graders. So we have a 50-meter pool which requires 5 tarps to cover it overnight. We have a deal with the coaches that their students will help swim the tarps across and help us clean up outside before we close down for the night. One night, the last tarp was stuck on the pool cover reel. One of the fifth graders was trying his best to get it unstuck. Brandon allegedly kept telling the child to let go so he could use his scissors to cut the stuck portion. The fifth graders weren't listening, or maybe you didn't hear. Next thing I hear from the other side of the 50-meter pool is Brandon shouting at this fifth grader. A fight broke out because his parents went over. After pulling them apart, I sent Brandon to my office. I was the aquatics director at the time and sat with the parents, the child, and the coaches, and it boiled down to fire him or lose our business. I told them I'd resolve the issue and they'd hear back from me before the master's session began the next day at 12. I go to security to watch the footage and I have it saved for later use. I go into my office to talk to Brandon and he is eating my stash of pretzels and has his feet on my desk, leaning back in my chair. I tell him, give me back my chair and sit in the seats provided, and he looks at me and says, "So, you gonna fire me?" He was always going to be fired, but after he said that, I went up front to grab security and have him forcefully escorted off the property. He was fired. Within the hour, I called the team back and told them he had been fired, effective immediately, and that word has been passed to all other families to not hire him with documented proof as to why. Skip to a few months later, and I'm about to enlist in the Navy, and my boss gives me the go-ahead to hire my replacement before I leave, and to find someone new to replace Brandon. I had my new hires, trained them up myself, and left the place in good standing. I came back a year later and everything went south. Apparently everyone I hired was immediately let go, and they rehired Brandon and some college kid with a financial degree to run the aquatics department. The facility I was at decided to let Brandon work before the master's team showed up so no one would be aware he was still active. He got caught, and that swim team pulled out, and our facility lost the majority of its income. There's more that happened with Brandon, but he is by far the biggest schmuck I have ever worked with. Wait, why do people do this unless they want to go out of business, rehiring folks that were already bad for their business? Story 2. My current coworker is absolutely terrible. He was essentially kicked out of his previous job site due to laziness and terrible work ethic. So they sent the guy over to my job site and rewarded him with his own office. He gets to sit in his office, ignoring phone calls and emails while playing video games all damn day. He goes on vacation but never tells his coworkers. I'd ask him to take care of something one day because I was going to be busy with a bunch of other stuff, and his response to me was, "Why can't you do it yourself?" Took everything in me to not clock this guy after that. We can see who's calling our lines on both of our phones. It's set up this way so he can cover my line in case I'm out and vice versa. He must know he's just barely scraping by because every time my boss calls me, my coworker calls me immediately after that call ends asking what it was about and if they were planning on making a personnel change. Never cares about any other person calling. At this point, I pretend he doesn't even exist, though he makes it very easy to pretend. My boss can't stand the guy and has been trying to get rid of him since he started working for our company 5+ years ago. But when I bring these things up to the owner multiple times in the last 18 months he's been working at this facility, I'm always met with a, "well, to be fair to him" excuse. None of the other employees care for him either, which makes my coworker staying at the company for 10+ years mind-blowing. Story 3. Frickin' Bob from sales. No one can stand him, but we will never, ever see the end of him because he makes us so much money. I'm talking about the top salesman in the US 10 years running in a highly competitive industry. So much money, but such a schmuck. Bob thinks all the girls in the office need to report their dating lives to him. Bob also thinks that girls who date are street workers and girls who don't date are frigid. Bob has 2 adult sons. When his sons start dating an undesirable woman, he bribes a woman to dump them. Bob takes great pleasure in telling us how much money it takes each woman to be convinced. Bob wants to set me up with one of his sons. This would be hell. Bob chooses to make long, loud sales calls in my office despite having his own that he rarely uses. He then quizzes me on what sales techniques he used during the call. Get off, I'm not in sales and I have my own work to do. Bob recently tried to shame the new receptionist for not having a good relationship with her son. It's easy to be a parent, easy to make your children love you, etc., etc. He wasn't pleased when I pointed out that one of his sons is currently no contact and the other is just using him to bankroll his new company. Bob thinks he has the defining knowledge on everything, but especially nutrition. He likes to criticize what people weigh, what they bring in for lunch. Bob is diabetic and about 75 pounds overweight. Bob thinks divorce is a sin. Bob is in his third marriage. On the business side, Bob likes to make promises that are impossible to uphold just to sell the product. Then he vanishes and makes the rest of the company deal with these customers with unreasonable expectations. Frickin' Bob, glad I switched departments and don't have to talk to him as much anymore. Story 4. We called her Pizza Thumbs. She was morbidly obese and didn't like showering, so she didn't. The smell that came from her and her cubicle was disturbing, sour milk mixed with old body odor. It made my stomach upset just thinking about it. Coworkers would purposely take wide detours away from her desk to avoid the smell. She was mean and kind of awful, but wanted attention, so she would sneeze as loud as she possibly could, about 4 or 5 times in a row. It was disturbing, and we were pretty sure sneezes 2 to 5 were fake for the attention. One day in a meeting, she was doing something so gross that I thought my coworker was going to retch on the conference table. We would get food often at work for the whole office, and the unwritten rule was if you weren't in line before her, you weren't eating. Not because she would take it all, which she would also do, but because she would continue to touch the food, hence the name Pizza Thumbs. Tear apart slices, continue to touch more slices, and leave those contaminated slices for everyone else. I'm pretty sure we threw a party when she got transferred to another location. Story 5. At 21, I worked for a very weak male project manager who would turn to jelly the moment a woman was involved. He was often very distracted, and once when we didn't lock his computer, I saw most of his work time was spent on a messed up custody battle with his ex-wife. He was also quite the coward, so he'd send me as a sacrificial lamb to very contentious situations to see how much I'd get roughened up before he got involved. He is the most pathetic manager I've ever worked for, and when we had a meeting showdowns when female managers would try and pin their team's non-performance on me, not only did he do nothing, he rebuked me when I defended myself, expecting me to take it as junior staff and make his life easier. It all came to a head when after many of these situations, I told him I would never, ever assume responsibility for something I didn't do, which he didn't like. This was after I'd repeatedly protected him with clients when he'd gone AWOL, so I pushed for a transfer to get away from him. I hate weak managers, and I will never work for someone that takes the title and the money and doesn't step up and do the job. Well, I guess the saying, behind every great man is a great woman, doesn't apply to this guy. Story 6. At the community gym I managed, my boss hired an office assistant for himself, but it was really for me to do his job. She was a smoker who reeked. I don't have a problem with smokers. I have one problem with that if she works in a gym with students and senior citizens and she just stinks like an ashtray. Oh wait, there's more. She contacted HR because one day, after 4 years of me coming in 10 minutes early, I went in at my start time. Worse yet, I had the audacity to text her that my car was parked in by a delivery truck. She knew I would not be 10 minutes early. She made a big stink, aside from the olfactory type, and gym members' heads turned to watch her berate me for being late. It was still 2 minutes before my shift. I went to the HR meeting, which was basically, why can't we just get along? And it was fine for a week. She and I not speaking to one another was fine. Then 2020 shut down our business. I never saw her again. The end. Story 7. I worked for a very wealthy attorney whose son was convicted of being a criminal. The whole family treated people terribly. Everyone around them was there to be used and discarded. The fact that the son was actually convicted and publicly shamed happened only because the severity of his crimes was so egregious that the courts couldn't ignore it, and the family couldn't overcome the victims' statements the way they ran over everyone else. The son's defense in court was a window into the way this family treated everyone. The victims were at fault because they were trying to get something from him. My boss viewed everything that way. He saw his employees as money-taking expenses and instantly discounted any work they did as unimportant, unskilled, worthless. Worst boss ever. Story 8. I had a boss who tried to overrule my bonus structure within the first month of her employment. She stole a presentation I created and presented it as her own. She asked me to finish my degree and the company would pay for it from our scholarship fund, which turned into her lying to our president and me screaming at both of them. I was a single mom with thousands in debt because of them. She once told me that she could make me chauffeur her children around if she wanted to because she was above me. She asked the president to fire me after I transferred out of her department. Now, reader, you might assume she was evil. She was, and malicious, indeed. But she was also as dumb as a box of rocks. This woman couldn't tell accounting from hieroglyphics if her life depended on it. When I finally quit that job, she requested an exit interview to which I ever so politely declined and wished her ill. Story 9. My cousin. I worked at Pizza Hut, and she was hired after I was. I hadn't seen her often and didn't know her well, not really close with most of my family, much as I love them. So I didn't know enough to warn my boss. She is the most petty, narcissistic, angry, confrontational, evil little witch I have ever met in my life. Nothing is ever her fault. She's always a victim. Will straight up lie to your face about things you were there for. She'd throw fits in front of customers, throw things, scream, etc. She didn't last very long, and her boyfriend was trespassed from the property for getting in the manager's face and threatening him. I'd like to note that the manager was one of the kindest, most awesome men I've ever met, and he could definitely have wiped the floor with the schmuck if he had just a bit less patience. Story 10. Tracy. Let's call her Tracy. Tracy was fat, ugly, had a screeching voice, a bad attitude, and a nasty body odor. Tracy accidentally lost all the passwords for every system other than the main one we used, meaning that if any calls came through to her for any of the other systems, she had to pass the work on to the rest of us. Why the supervisors tolerated this? I've no idea. Tracy would claim ignorance on how to perform a process that was everyone's responsibility. When she picked up the phone to someone who needed that task to be done, again, she would fob it off onto one of the rest of us. Tracy would shout across the entire room. Tracy would trash talk the supervisor and, when told to just log off and go home, simply refused. Again, why she was not disciplined for any of that, I have no idea. So, screw you, Tracy. Story 11. I once had a manager who insisted that our team was a family. To her, that meant she was way too involved in everyone's personal life to an inappropriate level. It got so bad that when I was going through a divorce that she would regularly text my ex and keep me up to date on what was going on with me. I had to file a complaint to HR just to get her to stop. She ended up having to formally apologize and sign some form saying she would no longer text the partners of any employees that had not given her written permission to do so. Of course, she used that fact that I filed a complaint to HR as a reason to bash me to the entire team and every other manager in the company. Unsurprisingly, when layoffs started in 2020, I was in the first round to go. I still keep in touch with some of the people who work there, and this woman still bashes me even nearly 6 years after I reported her. Story 12. My current employer. She's a very nice lady and caring as well. Problem is, she has untreated ADHD and will not take her meds because she is fighting it. She gets really loud when she's excited. I've had to shut her office door. She's very scattered and disorganized. I've sat with her countless times to show her the folders I've created on her laptop in order for her to locate clients and remember what they need. I'll be in the middle of a task and have to drop what I'm doing to start another task of equal importance. She spits food out on her keyboard. We have an 80-pound office dog she can't handle, which I take out and work with. Love that dog, but just another interruption. Problem is, I'm paid very well, and she's very generous with the bonuses, so I'm not going anywhere. Story 13. I worked for a lady who was absolutely horrible. It was a leasing position at an apartment complex. She was semi-okay until the maintenance man took a liking to me. Apparently, she had always had a crush on him, even though she was married. I had a boyfriend and was not interested in him. I kept it professional. He would even bring me things like Starbucks, which I didn't ask for. And it never interfered with my work. She could not stand him stopping by my desk for 30 seconds. At first, she kept praising my work ethic. But after his interest, she was just out to get me. I was also working every Saturday and Sunday, which was not the original agreement, but nice extra money. So this gave her every weekend off. She was technically supposed to work 2 weekends a month as the property manager. She also made it a point to tell me negative things about him, that he was divorced and paying a lot in child support, and she knew this because it was taken out of his check and she was with his boss, so unethical. That he moved back with his mom after divorce, and she even told me his father was Puerto Rican. No idea what that was about and seemed kind of prejudiced. She said so much more, but I think I blocked it out over the years. I finally couldn't take it anymore and tried to put my notice in, but she told me no, like, what the hell? So I just dropped the courtesy of giving 2 weeks' notice and went to her boss. I told him everything. I would dread going to work and feel sick. It was all just so pointless. I wasn't interested in him, and I don't date at work. Apparently her boss and HR came and had a long meeting with her right after, and then she started having to work weekends again. She'd hurt herself in the foot. Me being there was meeting all the leasing goals and she was getting every weekend off. Right after, she kept calling and texting me and they verged on being threats. Blocked and sent them to her boss. Tell him I would call the police if she didn't stop. No idea what happened to her at that point. She was such an insecure control freak. Story 14. A former manager, let's call her 80, at my first real job. 80 only became a manager because she'd been there for like 10 plus years and had no idea how to be a manager. She was rude, self-centered, a know-it-all who didn't know it all and heavily favored the 3 other women who were her minority as well and constantly got onto the other 3 of her group that weren't her minority and women over every single thing. I remember once she tried to ream a coworker and I for taking a 61-minute lunch instead of an hour when she stopped us in the hallway to talk to us about a project we were working on while going back to her desk. The worst experience I had was a one-on-one I had with her in which she was moisturizing herself during our talk and then kicked off her shoes and started rubbing lotion all over her feet. When we got done talking, she reached over to shake my hand and got extremely offended when I refused to reciprocate. Thank God I got out of her group and then onto bigger and better jobs in my field and career. Story 15. I feel lucky my worst coworker was sweet, just annoying as hell. She ate lunch at her desk and liked smacking her lips and talking with her mouth so full you could barely understand her. And she never, ever shut up. She also never washed her hands after using the bathroom, so her incessant habit of manhandling any food you brought in and cutting it in half, or quarters if it was already halved, or eighths if it was already quartered, she could never take anything without splitting it, was not only obnoxious but disgusting. She also cleared her throat about 20 times a minute, and I'm barely exaggerating here. I try to give people a lot of benefit of the doubt when it comes to intelligence because intelligence takes so many forms, but she definitely tried me. Her car got broken into while she was at the gym. They got away with her entire purse because, and I quote, "Of course I left it in there." Not, of course, as in, God, of course I just had her do that. Nope. Of course, as in, well, that's just what you do at the gym, duh. She also accused a local Asian restaurant of serving magic mushrooms because, quote, they had this weird poster in there about space, the final frontier. Story 16. Years ago, I worked for a company with multiple offices around the world. The lead sales guy in our European office was one of the worst people I've ever worked with. Let's call him Jack. Jack wouldn't be prepared for most meetings, while other sales leads would show up with slide decks, charts, etc. He would not, despite being asked to multiple times. When asked simple questions like, "What is the total value of your pipeline?" he would respond, "I don't know," and act like we were rude for asking him a bare minimum question for someone in his role. He would talk down to other employees, especially women, and frequently get all huffy on calls if called out for his rudeness. He also would frequently be late to calls and clearly be unengaged with the discussion. In the 2 years I worked with him, not only did he never book a single order, he in fact was so laissez-faire that he missed several major programs in his region that would have been a perfect fit for our product. So it wasn't like he even made up for being a schmuck by being good at his job. Why wasn't he fired? Well, he was friends with the CEO, so despite being a terrible employee in terms of attitude and results, he always just coasted by. So he was the ultimate fake it till you make it, and then he just never made it kind of guy. Story 17. I worked in a high school and had a coworker that yelled at his coworkers the same he yelled at kids. He acted like he was the boss. He wasn't. He had the same status as me. But since he had been there for long, he decided that he had to lead. Our job was to take care of the kids through the day, morning when they arrive, lunch, and until they leave for school. The issue is often he treats coworkers the same as the kids, and he doesn't treat the kids well. Basically, his view of authority and education is to yell at kids until they are scared of him and quote-unquote respect him. Once I had high schoolers come to me at lunch to ask me if they could use the microwave. They are 17-year-old teens. I saw no issue for them to use it. Nobody ever told me they aren't allowed to use it, and there's no paper that says so around. So of course I let them. The microwave is here for a reason, to be used. I let them and discuss with them, and at one point I hear a scream and, "Get away from the microwave, you are not supposed to use it." I jumped a little. I turn back and it's my older coworker. He walks to us, furious. He starts yelling at me, the kids. That's the issue. The kids and me were standing side to side, and it looked like he was yelling at all of us, at me like I was a high schooler, and at them like they were idiots when it's me who let them. I have the same authority as this guy. I let him get angry. They're not supposed to use it, he keeps repeating. I don't mind. At this point, I knew I was going to leave this job soon. I just told the boys that they did nothing wrong and not to pay attention to it because it was me who let them. I only told my coworker that the microwave is here for a reason, and if I'm next to the kids, they aren't going to mess with it. But of course, he trusts no kids and keeps saying that they can't use it because they'll mess everything up and do it to annoy us. I simply shrugged and told him it's on me, not the kids. Time passed and came the day I left the job. Two of my bosses asked me before I left what has been my issues, etc., what I thought of the job. I told them about this story and they were very surprised because they agreed that there was no issue using this damn microwave. It was funny how they told me, he can't do that, what's wrong with him? I'm glad they reacted that way. The convo was definitely funny. In the end, I knew I had done nothing wrong but my job. I really love working with kids and I hate people that treat them worse than prisoners because they think authority is kids being terrified of you so they respect you. If you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 18. My worst managers have, without exception, been women. We had one woman join our team and we were all quite dazzled by her and excited for her to start. Yada yada yada, large Instagram following, super glamorous, lots of experience with major companies, owned her own fashion business. The kind of woman you could learn a thing or two from if she wasn't Satan. I hate calling women witches, but this woman was a straight cold witch. On her first day, she demanded my parking spot because it was marginally closer to the elevator. In her 3 months there, she made every female colleague cry. Complaint after complaint was ignored by HR. One day, she decided she was having a work-from-bed day. We all worked in the office and told me and two female colleagues we needed to go to her house for a meeting. We showed up to her in her nightgown in bed while we hovered by the bedroom door. It was a very banal, non-urgent meeting that took maybe 15 minutes. Her house was huge but barely furnished. That's not an example of her being a witch. It was just very awkward and weird. I later found out she only got hired because her business was failing and she was friends with the owner of the company. All her fancy jobs at large companies lasted under a year because she kept causing chaos and drama. The reason her shiny new Merc was always in for repairs is because it was repossessed. Her giant house was barely furnished because her furniture had been auctioned to pay off debt. Anyway, she's a life coach now. Story 19. My former manager started as someone I worked with at another job, then became a coworker when I changed jobs, and he was actually pretty cool. We went to a lot of happy hours and got along great. He was a manager on a different team, but when my manager moved into another role, this person became my manager. Micromanager was the least of it. Not only did he nitpick everything we all did, but during 2020, he would look at our schedules. By the way, whatever you put into Outlook is not private. And keep track of what we were doing in the system, so if we had any meetings he didn't like, or if we were inactive for more than 10 minutes, he would message us about it. He also always made himself the hero. When I worked on things with external vendors, he would take credit. I remember a few times where I spoke with the vendor, got them to lower prices, while my manager immediately said he, and only he, did the work. When someone had an issue with something I was doing, he would tell me to stay the course, while also telling the other person I was being ridiculous and he would get me to do it. He constantly told us to do or say one thing while undermining us so he could look like the only savior, the only one who cares. He would tell me to do something and I would write it down, and then a week later he would ask why I was doing something so stupid and tell me a different way of doing it. If I sent him the notes I took or the email he sent explaining the previous process, he would either ignore it or deny his involvement. Anytime one of us would send him something useful or interesting, he would distribute it to the team and claim he found it or came up with it. He referred to his direct reports as my minions and constantly talked about how he was the smartest and hardest working one on his team and how he was the only one capable of solving all the constant issues, many of which were the direct result of his own decree. Further, he would be your best friend but would constantly gossip. As your best friend, he would constantly make fun of you, but if you made one comment about him, he would be furious. He also loved to answer questions with, "I'm the boss, so you do as I say." I think the worst part is no one believed me when I would tell them just how bad it was till I started keeping a record of our interactions. I finally got the hell out of there, and when I gave my 2 weeks, he yelled at me again for being disrespectful and sneaky. How dare I give him only 2 weeks when he clearly had earned a little more respect than that? He would also test our loyalty by trying to start a situation and see if we sided with him, even when it was against our own interests, constantly. And all of the bad things he did was incredibly blatant. He wasn't even good at being manipulative, and anyone could spot what he was setting up from a mile away. Story 20. Two guys at the same place, one my manager and one a coworker on my team. My manager, at the time and place, was a coworker before being promoted, but he never did any work when in the same position I was. Our job was to take calls and answer emails, and the entire 2 months he was in the position, he only took 4 calls. And we all knew it because he bragged about it after getting promoted. Then, as a manager, the guy didn't know crap about the job or how to handle upset customers. We would ask him for help on what to do in a situation we were in on a call, and he would just shrug, say, figure it out, and walk away. The only time he actually did a manager call was when it was someone he was friends with that asked, and he would be a total a-hole to the customer. One time, everyone was having tech issues, and in that company, protocol is to let your manager know so he can add your name to the list if it's more than 2 people affected. So when it happened to me, I let him know, and he said, "Okay, what do you want me to do about it?" I told him he needed to write it down per company rules, and he said, "Can't you see everyone else is having issues? What do you want me to do?" No matter what I told him, he just kept saying he couldn't do anything. Until I got so frustrated, I just told him to go sit down and do nothing since that's all he knows how to do. From there, he tried to make it seem like I was the one in the wrong and that he was trying to do his job. Another manager had to step in to tell me it wasn't worth it trying to argue with him before I got myself fired. Anyways, I quit that job weeks later due to it literally losing money, and I knew it was going to shut down one way or another. The second guy was a real schmuck. Let's call him Alex, not his real name. He constantly pestered everyone and played it off as a joke, and that he didn't mean it because he's not straight and doesn't do it in a mean way like a straight guy would. And this guy would pass by and hit my head, throw crap at me, mock me as I walked by, and would even turn my entire computer system off and flip everything upside down if I even left my desk for any kind of break or reason, like needing to talk to a manager face to face. No one did anything because he was cool with all the managers, and no one wanted to get labeled as because he always brought it up whenever someone called him out on his crap. I was not the only one he was doing things like this to, but he was the one doing it to me and then trying to act like he was my friend after doing it. Like it wasn't making me visibly angry being hit and having my entire desk messed with every day, multiple times a day. Anyways, yeah, I hate those guys. Story 21. I got a job as an admin assistant to the managing director of a department. Prior to my hiring, the group had been made up of one woman, Nancy, and the rest were males. The first day there, my boss asked Nancy to take me to lunch. There, she proceeded to tell me that no one in the department, including my boss, wanted to hire me but agreed to force him to take me. She also alluded to the fact that Jerry, my boss, would never choose me over her in anything and that he hated to be bothered by female disagreements. For months, she refused to show me how to do anything, so I had to figure out things on my own. One thing I did was to convert a huge, handwritten binder of invoices paid for 320 offices throughout the country into an Excel spreadsheet and give everyone in our group read access. She had literally been printing out blank Excel sheets and handwriting everything for years. If a vendor asked calling about a payment, it sometimes took a week to find the reference notation because she used random abbreviations for a company name, store location, even though each had a unique number, and could list the same company 3 different ways on the same sheet. She waited until the boss was gone and blew up at me for daring to change the procedure. I explained that nothing had changed with the procedure except that instead of handwriting the information, it was now typed into the spreadsheet. She tried to report me to HR, but once they questioned me and I showed them what I did, nothing ever came of it. I also pointed out that they kept calling Nancy my supervisor and claiming insubordination, but she was actually a coworker in the department. When it came time for my annual review, my boss and I went to a conference room in another wing of the building. Nancy came and stood outside the glass door the entire time. Jerry went and asked if she needed something, and she said she thought he might need her to provide feedback or answer questions, and told him she would stick around. I did tell him about the hiring comment and other things she had said or did to undermine me, and his response was, "Oh, I don't think Nancy would ever do anything like that." I then told him another very terrible personal thing she said to me, and the look on his face was priceless. I said, "She has said that about me to you, hasn't she?" He admitted that she had, and I asked him why he hadn't come to me to discuss it. He claimed that he just thought she was in a bad mood that day. I looked him directly in the eye and said, Jerry, she speaks to me like this every single day. Is that how your employee is supposed to treat me? Things improved a bit after that, but she still made me as miserable as possible when he was out of the office. As info, I improved several other processes within the department, and other members came to me to offer their thanks for finally getting things organized. I asked each one whether they thought I shouldn't have been hired, and each one was shocked, saying everyone had been impressed with my resume and educational background. Story 22. I worked with a lady who was sleeping with the boss, so she did about 50% of what she was supposed to do. The rest fell on myself and other coworkers to get done. He ended up dying of a massive heart attack, and she started doing about 25% of the work she was supposed to do. Everyone, including me, felt really bad for her loss, so we just put up with it for about a year. Then she started sleeping with the old guy's replacement, and even though I didn't think it was possible, she started doing even less. She chased out several coworkers who complained and pestered everyone else into submission. The boss wouldn't do anything because after she broke up his long-term marriage, they moved in together and he went home with her every night. The best part is she even bullied him. People went to HR, the union, the boss's boss. No one was willing to do anything. Eventually, he retired and she realized that she couldn't get away with for anymore. And it also dawned on her that everyone hated her. She left and found a different job about a year after he retired. No word on if she slept with her new boss. Story 23. I once worked on a TV show that got canceled, and the script supervisor was just an average middle-aged lady, but man, was she crazy. She went out of her way to be nice and befriend the younger PAs and get in their heads. For example, so what are your hopes and dreams? And then gradually start being incredibly manipulative and winding them up. OMG, I can't believe they're treating you this way. To either do stupid stuff or quit as a means of entertaining herself. She was the worst kind of white savior neoliberal, think Peggy Hill levels of misguided I know what's best. And was so wildly full of herself, it was ridiculous. The crew had been together for years and everyone noticed how she would go out of her way to kick it with the younger kids and we all had theories, lol. I had a family that had worked with her before I did, so when she tried so what do you really want to do with your life? I was ready and answered that I just wanted to sell cabbages by the side of the road, and she looked at me horrified, LMAO. I got stuck in a van with her once, and Instagram somehow came up, and I remember her looking closely at me and then declaring, of course, I don't add just anybody, you understand, right? Like it was so incredibly delusional, I almost laughed in her face. She's probably still out there psychologically terrorizing PAs to this day. Story 24. Recently, we had a parade of untrainables come through my workplace. Like, your 90 days is almost over, and we're going to offer you 30 more days because you're a decent human being who can carry a conversation and be decent. But then you spend half your shift asking day one questions and having a hard time understanding the answers. But the winner, this guy got his job. He routinely sent out bad products, damaged machines constantly, and admitted to sabotage at least twice. He was constantly making things up about his proficiency with every machine in the shop. On my first and only day training on his machine, I produced better quality and more quantity than his best day before or after, and his assistant asked management if they could work with me from then on. Couldn't spell or pronounce big words. He'd spell the same word 2 different ways on one page with the word and the customer's name at the top of that page. One time, he showed up at my workstation and started checking out my wrench set, so I told him I sent out a bad job a little earlier. He left my wrenches alone and the supervisor was on my case within a minute. I told him he was looking to steal my tools, so I told him something that would make him go get you and forget about my tools. Showed the supervisor my good sample and went about my day. Dude's wife was busted with whiskey mixed into something else in her half-empty thermos. Another day, she put their truck in reverse and it backed through a residential fence on the edge of company property. She was protected because she was married to him. Best part, the only reason he landed the job was knowing the boss. Keeping the job meant staying useful. When the boss finally sold the company, the buyer took the customer list and 2 machines, fired everyone, and just let everything else in the shop go to the scrapyard. Then he showed up at his house like he was there to be friends or maybe help with yard work like he sometimes did. And the boss told him he didn't need him anymore, straight up kicked him off of his property. Story 25. Animal manager at a zoo who would take ideas from keepers in meetings for animal enrichment, then a week or 2 later announce he's had a great idea. Also being, quote, senior, he, quote, knew far more than senior keepers, to the point that over the course of 2 years he dismissed points raised by keepers of all ranks which caused many animals to pass away needlessly and keepers to be put in real danger. He was also creepy as hell, always employing the youngest, prettiest women and referring to them as his girls, and would rent out a room within his house to interns or apprentices, but only to those who were young women, never the men. Eventually, it turned out that he had hidden cameras throughout his house that recorded 24/7 that he never told his lodgers about until one apprentice randomly used her phone to film something in the house and saw the glare in the image. He also openly mocked people with mental health issues and made sickening jokes about the volunteers affected by autism, one of whom I became close friends with. Finally, when the zoo introduced a new training module for all staff members to undertake to address the understanding of mental health, disabilities, etc., he simply laughed and said out loud to all of us in the room, "What a load of crap, absolutely waste of everyone's time." Thankfully, he and all the old boys and those of similar mindsets were ousted. Story 26. I work third shift at a factory on a mechanical press, putting end connections on pipes of various thicknesses. At the end of the shift, I'd oil the press, put everything back to its location, reset the machine, and get everything back to new. This old crybaby of a man who had been there for well over 2 decades would constantly yell at me for the smallest thing, including not fully closing the cardboard boxes the fittings were put in, pushing the rubber standing mat too close to the block cart, leaving a soda bottle cap under the computer keyboard and not unclicking the pens after using them. Tried for a bit to do everything he wanted because he had been there so much longer than me, but it got to a point where I just told him to punch sand and go cry to the manager. He did and kept doing so until they got tired and moved me to a different station. Oh, the best part? Didn't even work my shift, he was first shift. He would go out of his way to come in early at like 5 a.m. before my shift ended to find these problems and yell at me. Story 27. I had a part-time job in high school and this new girl Lisa started and was troublesome right off the bat. Not showing up, calling out, begging, convincing people to cover her shifts but never helping return the favor. When she did show up, she complained constantly and hid away a lot to avoid work. One day we were on the same shift and I had money taken out of my purse which was locked up in the employee locker room. Probably like $40, and I reported it to our lazy supervisor who probably did nothing. Then a few weeks later, I was robbed again from a different locker, and this time it was $300. I was going Christmas shopping after work to buy gifts for my siblings and parents. I helplessly sat down on a bench in the locker room and was visibly upset, telling my coworkers in the locking room how I was going Christmas shopping for my family. Lisa was in the room at the time, and I could feel her burning a hole in me. I hope she felt like a monster. A week or so later, Lisa either quit or got fired unrelated to the stealing. Never saw her again. I heard from another coworker that she hung out in the locker room a lot during her shifts. Lisa, if you're still alive, I hope you turned your life around. And if you like these stories so far, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.